as the United States-led coalition assembled, ready to liberate Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. The Iraqi regime was putting a sinister plan into action. Faced with the vastly superior military force, the Iraqi regime decided it wasn't going out without a fight, and began to systematically destroy as much of Kuwait's oil reserves and infrastructure as possible before withdrawing. As early as December 1990, Iraqi forces placed explosive charges on Kuwait's oil wells. The wells were methodically sabotaged, beginning on the 16th of January 1991, when the Allied coalition commenced airstrikes against Iraqi targets. It was a few weeks later, however, on the 8th of February, that satellite images detected the first smoke from the burning oil wells, unveiling the true scale of the Scorched Earth policy, as over 600 oil wells in Kuwait were ignited. This act of sabotage unleashed an environmental catastrophe of unprecedented scale. The flames, some roaring over 300 feet, created a hellish landscape of fire and smoke that turned day into night. Thick black plumes of soot and toxic gases billowed into the sky, forming a vast impenetrable cloud that spread across the region, blocking out the sun. The air reeked of burning oil, and the ground was covered in pools of boiling crude, making the area a hazardous wasteland. Efforts to extinguish the infernos were a race against time. A global coalition of firefighters, engineers and experts, dubbed the Hellfighters, were brought in. These brave individuals faced extreme heat, volatile explosions and poisonous fumes. The situation was dire, and every moment of delay meant further environmental damage and economic loss. The scale of the disaster threatened not only Kuwait, but also the surrounding regions, potentially causing long-term ecological harm. The Hellfighters employed innovative techniques and cutting-edge technology, battling the flames day and night. They used explosives to snuff out the fires, water and foam to cool the burning oil, and heavy machinery to cap the wells. The task was grueling and dangerous, with the constant threat of new explosions looming. By November 1991, after months of relentless effort, the last of the fires were extinguished. The battle against the inferno was won, but the scars on the land and the impact on the environment and the health of the region's people would linger for years. The Kuwait oil fires remain one of the most dramatic and destructive episodes in environmental history, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of war. Backstory. Throughout the Cold War, Iraq had been an ally of the Soviet Union, and there was a history of friction between Iraq and the United States. The US was concerned with Iraq's position on Israeli-Palestinian politics. The US also disliked Iraqi support for Palestinian militant groups, which led to Iraq's inclusion on the developing US list of state sponsors of terrorism in December 1979. The US remained officially neutral after Iraq's invasion of Iran in 1980, which then became the Iran-Iraq War, although it provided resources, political support, and some non-military aircraft to Iraq. Iraq started to struggle in the war, however, and in a US bid to open full diplomatic relations with Iraq, the country was removed from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. It was the US's official position that this was due to an improvement in the regime's record. However, the real reason was to help them succeed in the war against Iran. This eventually led to Iraqi success, and by the time the ceasefire with Iran was signed in August 1988, Iran was heavily debt-ridden and tensions within society were rising. Most of his debt was owed to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iraq's debt to Kuwait amounted to $14 billion. Iraq pressured both nations to forgive the debts, but they refused. After some diplomatic back and forth, it all came to a boil for Saddam Hussein, who on the 2nd of August 1990 commanded Iraqi forces to invade Kuwait, swiftly overwhelming the small nation's defences. This aggressive move was driven by Iraq's desire to control Kuwait's vast oil reserves and to resolve economic disputes, including accusations that Kuwait was slant drilling into Iraqi oil fields. The international community swiftly condemned the invasion. The United Nations imposed economic sanctions on Iraq and demanded an immediate withdrawal of Iraqi troops. When diplomatic efforts failed, a US-led coalition of 35 nations launched Operation Desert Storm on the 17th of January 1991 to liberate Kuwait. The coalition's military campaign involved extensive aerial bombardment, followed by a ground assault, which began on the 24th of February 1991. Scorched Earth. With a tough war ahead and defeat imminent, Saddam Hussein gave the orders. Iraq's Scorched Earth policy was a devastating strategy implemented as Iraqi forces withdrew from Kuwait in early 1991. This policy was driven by a desire to inflict maximum economic damage on Kuwait and create significant obstacles for the advancing US-led coalition forces. In a bid to leave a lasting mark and complicate the coalition's advance, Iraqi troops set fire to over 600 Kuwaiti oil wells. This Scorched Earth policy resulted in one of the largest environmental disasters in history. Massive plumes of thick black smoke billowed into the sky, blocking sunlight and releasing harmful pollutants into the atmosphere. The fires created hazardous conditions for both military personnel and civilians, causing severe air and ground pollution. In March 1991, the accumulated financial losses were estimated to be as much as 10% of 90 billion barrels of Kuwait oil reserves, based on a statement made by a Kuwait oil company official. At the world prices at the time, it would amount to around $157.5 billion US. It also had a military advantage for the Iraqis, as the Iraqi militant combat engineers also released oil into low-lying areas for defensive purposes against infantry and mechanized units along Kuwait's southern border by constructing several fire trenches roughly 1 kilometre long and 3 metres wide and deep to impede the advance of the coalition ground forces. It was also expected to be an issue to aerial forces too, with the smoke affecting visibility and navigation systems. This did have some effect, as on the 21st of March 1991, a Royal Saudi Air Force C-130H crashed in heavy smoke due to the Kuwaiti oil fires on approach to Ras Mishab Airport, Saudi Arabia. 92 Senegalese soldiers and 6 Saudi crew members were killed, the largest accident among coalition forces. Motives. There were several strategic, economic and psychological reasons for setting the fires. Economic sabotage. One of the primary motives was to inflict severe economic damage on Kuwait. By igniting over 600 oil wells, Iraq aimed to cripple Kuwait's primary economic resource. Oil exports were the lifeblood of Kuwait's economy, and the fires ensured that Kuwait's recovery would be prolonged and financially burdensome. The massive destruction of oil infrastructure would also diminish Kuwait's ability to produce and sell oil, thereby impacting global oil supply and prices. Environmental warfare. The fires created a massive environmental catastrophe, producing thick toxic smoke that blanketed the region. This act of environmental warfare was intended to create long-term ecological damage, rendering large areas uninhabitable and unusable for agricultural or economic activities. The smoke from the fires caused severe air pollution, posing health risks to both the civilians and military personnel and complicating coalition operations. Psychological impact. The Scorched Earth policy was also designed to have a profound psychological impact. The sight of burning oil fields and the ensuing environmental destruction served as a demoralizing symbol of Iraq's capacity for ruthless retaliation. It was a message to the coalition forces and the international community of the lengths to which Iraq was willing to go, even in defeat. Military strategy. From a tactical standpoint, the fires created a significant obstacle for coalition forces. The intense heat, smoke and hazardous conditions hampered military operations, visibility and mobility. This could potentially slow the advance of coalition troops, buying time for Iraqi forces to regroup and retreat. Political defiance. Finally, the fires were an act of defiance against the international coalition and a symbolic gesture of resistance against the perceived imperialism of Western powers. By destroying the oil wells, Iraq was making a statement against the coalition's intervention and their goals in the region. Extinguish and recover. The firefighting efforts to extinguish the Kuwaiti oil fires and the subsequent recovery process were monumental undertakings involving extensive international collaboration, advanced technology, and immense human effort. The international response was swift and involved firefighters from several countries, including the US, Canada, and Hungary. Specialized teams used innovative techniques to extinguish the fires. The main methods included using high-pressure water jets, which cooled the flames and prevented reignition. This was used alongside mud and concrete to cap the wells and stop the flow of oil. Another unconventional method was using strategically placed explosives, which literally snuffed the flames out by depriving them of oxygen. It took nearly 10 months, from March to November 1991, to extinguish the last of the fires. This effort required around-the-clock work in extreme conditions, showcasing remarkable engineering and firefighting prowess. The environmental impact of the fire was catastrophic, with air pollution being the biggest issue. The fires emitted thick clouds of soot and toxic gases, significantly impacting air quality and contributing to respiratory issues among the population. Carl Sagan, the American astronomer and planetary scientist, recalled, "It was pitch black at noon, and the temperatures dropped 4 to 6 degrees over the Arabian Gulf." At the peak of the fires, the smoke absorbed 75 to 80% of the sun's radiation, and the particles rose to a maximum of 6,100 meters. The spilled oil formed vast lakes covering approximately 50 square kilometers, contaminating soil and groundwater, which then also reached the Persian Gulf, affecting marine life and ecosystems. Finally, the fires caused acid rain, which further damaged vegetation and soil quality. Recovery from the environmental disaster was a complex and prolonged process, with soil and water remediation high on the list of priorities. Efforts included removing contaminated soil, treating polluted water, and bioremediation techniques to break down oil residues. Furthermore, revegetation programs were implemented to replant vegetation in affected areas to restore the natural habitat. Kuwait also had to rebuild its oil infrastructure from scratch, a process that required significant investment and time. By 1992, oil production had resumed, though full recovery took several years. All of this included, alongside ongoing health assessments and environmental monitoring, were essential to address the long-term impacts of the pollution. The recovery was greatly aided by international support, both technical and financial. Various countries and organisations provided expertise and funds to help Kuwait rebuild and restore its environment. In summary, extinguishing the Kuwaiti oil fires and addressing the environmental damage required a massive, coordinated international effort. The recovery process, while successful in many respects, highlighted the long-term impacts of environmental warfare and the resilience of human and natural systems in the face of disaster. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a like, and for more amazing tales and thrilling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Secrets. Also, hit the bell icon to stay notified for every release.